think I mentioned it in one of my older videos, but it's worth saying again. Metal Gear Solid is my favourite game series of all time. I mean, not counting Pro Evolution Soccer, but sports games are different. Favourite series where you just play as a guy, let's say that. I've always wanted to talk about it, but it's one of those things where I've not been sure how to tackle it. There's lots of Metal Gear Solid retrospectives out there that deep dive into the story and all the hidden Easter eggs. The challenge for me is to be able to touch on that stuff without turning this into a play-by-play of the whole game. There will be spoilers throughout the video, as I want to touch on as many things as possible, but I don't want the video to be 3 hours long at the same time. I wanted to do what I normally do, give you my personal memories of playing these games for the first time back then and replaying them now. But with this being Metal Gear Solid, you need to talk about the story and the individual bosses, something I've not really done before. Like most people, my fandom for this series began with Metal Gear Solid, the game we're talking about today, but this is actually the third game in the Metal Gear series. Metal Gear and its sequel Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake were released on the MSX console back in the late 80s and early 90s. Now prior to Metal Gear Solid coming out, I'd not heard of those games, I'd not heard of that console. I'm sure I'm not alone there either, they just weren't that well known. Metal Gear Solid was released on the PlayStation in early 1999, here in Europe anyway. This is why I get confused when it's mentioned in that great 1998 year of gaming. It was released then in America and Japan, but for me, it's a 1999 game. Now my memories are a bit fuzzy of when I first played the game. It definitely wasn't when it first came out. See, my brother got a PS1 in 1997, which he then sold a couple years later. But he bought another one second hand in 2000 I think, either 2000 or late 99, I'm not quite sure of the dates. But I do know that I got an N64 in February 1988 for my birthday, so having a second console to myself was just out of the question. So for a couple years, the N64 was the only console in the house. I don't regret owning an N64. After all, this was the only place I could play ISS, Zelda, Mario, and of course the wrestling games, but it did have its drawbacks. Games were very few and far between, and very expensive. But also, it was quite kiddie, quite family friendly. Something that today, as an adult, I can completely appreciate and understand. But I was a 12-year-old boy at the time, you know, if you're anything like me, you wanted a taste of the edgier stuff. For this kind of thing, the N64 was limited to games like GoldenEye, Mission Impossible, Perfect Dark, Shadow Man. Don't get me wrong, I got some mileage out of these. Never was the biggest GoldenEye fan, but I really did like Perfect Dark with its more futuristic sci-fi kind of slant. But it still was an FPS, and I don't think FPSs really hit their stride until the next generation of consoles, where you could actually use two sticks to control them. And I do kinda love that piece of shit Mission Impossible game, but aye, it's not exactly Metal Gear Solid. And I knew the PlayStation was battering the N64 in sales at this point, but I was a Nintendo kid. I desperately wanted the N64 and the subsequent GameCube, which we knew then as a dolphin, to succeed. And I even had some inbuilt bias I think against the PlayStation as well, because before I was a Nintendo kid, I was a Sega kid who really wanted the Sega Saturn, and PlayStation beat the Saturn. Whew, it was brutal. This meant that even if PlayStation did have some games I liked the look of, I would kinda pretend I wasn't that into them. Kinda like when your football team loses one of their best players and you pretend they were never that good anyway. But there was still one game that I couldn't deny I really wanted to play. A style of game I'd never experienced before. A stealth action thriller that I could only play on PlayStation.
Siphon Filler?
Metal Gear Solid. Now as I said, this might have been mid to late 99 or it might have been early 2000, but my brother had a PlayStation again, and even this Nintendo fanboy was desperate to play MGS. But the PlayStation was my brother's, N64 was mine, we had separate rooms, so I wasn't really going to buy a single player PS1 game as I wouldn't be able to play it for hours on end by myself. I was also a kid and I didn't have any money, didn't have Christmas or a birthday coming up, so I wasn't going to own MGS anytime soon, but I did what I would do for 90% of the games that I played back then, I'd rent it. I still remember my first impressions of Metal Gear Solid. Not vividly, but I do remember. I remember really struggling with that very first section of the game. I'm pretty sure I didn't know what the word stealth meant at the time. So you've got two guards in this first section, and you really need to stay out of their sight. I didn't realise how useful that radar was at first. You have no weapons at this point, and your life bar is so small. Clearly, the game's trying to teach you, but I think I failed this section 5 or 6 times, because in my experience, if I didn't have a gun to shoot someone with, I should at least be able to jump on them, kill them. But I was eventually able to stumble through this part, and there was one thing that I remember striking me back then. The credits were coming up on the screen as I was playing, and as I ride up that first lift, the title screen comes in. I was like, whoa, this is just like a film. I mean, I'd seen intro movies before, before you actually get your hands on the controls, but the way they implement the credits and the title here was really subtle, but such an effective touch, and it's stayed as a memory for me all this time. Quite ironic, because nowadays I don't like it when games are trying too hard to be films, but this was really novel back in the day. Another couple of things I remember from that initial rental were, of course, your footprint staying in the snow, which enemies could actually pick up on, and being able to knock on a wall to attract attention, which I just thought was the coolest thing in the world. Again, put yourself in my shoes as a 13-year-old in 1999, you definitely couldn't do that in Mario, Zelda or Sonic. Now, forgive me, but I'm going to end up using the word cool an awful lot in this video. Partly because I've got quite a limited vocabulary and it's a word I use quite a lot, but also because I just don't think there's a better word to describe the appeal of this game, particularly back then. It's just so cool. Metal Gear Solid has a lot of cool words, and interestingly, cool combinations of words that I'd never heard of back then. Here's a few. Genome, SOCOM, Codec, Espionage, Archipelago, which I always used to get mixed up with arpeggio. This is an archipelago. This is an arpeggio. COA, short for Course of Action. Vulcan Raven, Psycho Mantis, Chaff Grenade, Soliton Radar, Shadow Moses, Foxhound, Decoy Octopus, Sniper Wolf, Pineapples. Like pineapples, like grenades, not an actual pineapple, but pineapples. And there's plenty I've not mentioned, but even just after that 2-day rental, these phrases seem to be imprinted in my brain forever, and I can't explain why. There's just another worldly quality to them, just an intangible coolness, which I suppose you could tie into the PlayStation 1 as a whole. PS1 really seemed to kind of capture the zeitgeist of mid-late 90s Europe and Japan, whereas you think of N64, you think more about this. Anyway, from that rental, I remember getting past the first boss and not much further, but it was enough to know I had to get back to this game at some point. It wasn't my favourite game of all time or anything, but I'd played absolutely nothing like it, and it made its mark. Now, fast forward to summer 2000, a few months later, I get a gaming magazine. Can't remember which one exactly, but it was covering the recent E3. Probably the first E3 that I was properly aware of. See, pre-internet, all the gaming knowledge I had was from magazines, good old digitizer on teletext, and the odd TV show you'd get at the time. I think at this point, the quote popular one would have been Cybernet. Used to show it at like 4 in the morning on ITV, something like that, or maybe at a decent time on one of the other channels like Bravo, but it was still pretty niche. So I'd see footage of games on Cybernet, but glimpses of games that I actually wanted to play were pretty few and far between. Most of the time, you'd just buy a game sight unseen, just seeing screenshots in magazines. It's pretty mad to think about now with how much you can watch on YouTube, like this video I'm watching right now. But this magazine that I got had a feature on Metal Gear Solid 2 at E3 2000, and it talked about how mind-blowing the trailer was. It showed screenshots and it described what that trailer entailed. They'd run it on the E3 show floor every hour, getting a massive crowd each time, and the crowd just had their jaws on the floor.
It's great. It's just lovely. I mean, wow, it's incredible. I can't believe this.
Oh, I can't believe just the technology involved, all the particles, the rainstorm when he's running around in the rain, every raindrop seems to hit him and everything around him. It just looks incredible.
Then, in September of that year, the magazine PSM2 launched. Issue 1 had a video, a VHS of that trailer. I don't want to get too into it here, I'll save it for a Metal Gear Solid 2 video, but needless to say, it blew me away. And I decided, fuck Mario, fuck Zelda. It's funny just writing the words down in a script and now saying them on camera. Anyway, I'm a PlayStation guy now, I want to get on the winning team. I was very fortunately given a PS2 that Christmas. After the impressive graphics of FIFA 2001 and Smuggler's Run had worn off, I wanted to sink my teeth into a proper single player game. That's when I was finally able to buy Metal Gear Solid and play it on my own console. Because of course, one of the draws of the PS2 was, as well as being able to play PS2 games and DVDs, which was a huge deal at the time. I remember getting Mission Impossible 2 on DVD that Christmas as well, so we brought it back to Mission Impossible eventually.
Way to go! Way to go! I singed my hair. I singed my hair.
It was also able to play PS1 games. So, we're at the beginning of 2001, and I don't know how it works in the rest of the world, but in Scotland we had these things called prelims, right after our Christmas holidays. These are 2 weeks of kind of test exams before we got our standard grade exams closer to the summer. In these 2 weeks you go into school maybe 5 times for a couple of hours to sit the actual tests. The rest of your time was to study. Now I think I did a reasonable amount of studying for these, but it's not like I was at school for 7 hours a day like usual, so somehow I found time for my very first playthrough of Metal Gear Solid. Well, it's taken me about 11 minutes and 3 pages of this script to get to this point. Maybe I should explain what the game actually is. Metal Gear Solid is an action-adventure stealth game developed and published by Konami, and it's directed, produced and written by Hideo Kojima, the mastermind behind the whole series. You play as Solid Snake, whose name I didn't include in the cool combinations of words for obvious reasons, but 90% of the time he's just referred to as Snake, so it's fine really. Snake was a legendary soldier. He's now retired, but he was once a member of the Special Forces unit called Foxhound. The game begins with Snake's former commanding officer, Colonel Roy Campbell, getting in touch with him. Snake's job isn't to save the princess or defeat an evil king or anything like I'd been used to, no. Snake's job is to infiltrate a nuclear weapons disposal facility called Shadow Moses. Shadow Moses is on a remote island in an archipelago in Alaska. His job is to rescue the hostages and stop the terrorist group Foxhound from launching a nuclear strike. Wait, Foxhound? The one I just said Snake worked for? That's right. Since Snake and Campbell left Foxhound have gone all evil. Can you believe it? So now, Foxhound are comprised of
Psycho Mattis, with his powerful psychic abilities. Sniper Wolf, the beautiful and deadly sharpshooter. Decoy Octopus, master of disguise. Vulcan Raven, giant and shaman. And Revolver Ocelot, specialist in interrogation and a formidable gunfighter.
This is your group of baddies. And they're led by Liquid Snake, who happens to be our Snake's genetic brother. Again, what are the chances? Snake doesn't know that Liquid's his brother yet, but we'll get back to that. Now, Foxhound are holding these hostages, the DARPA chief Donald Anderson and Armstech President Kenneth Baker, and they're threatening the launch of a nuclear weapon. Their demands? $1 billion and the return of the remains of Big Boss. That's a funny name. Big Boss is known as the ultimate soldier and was killed by Snake in the previous game, one of those MSX games that we'd not played. Well, I have now, it's like 30 years later, but we'd not played back then. Foxhound want his remains so they can use his genetics to correct flaws in their experimental Genome Soldier project. Liquid also selfishly wants them for the same reasons. He wants them so he can study and correct flaws in his own DNA. We later find out that Snake and Liquid are genetic clones of Big Boss. Still with me? You'll be fine. Foxhound's method of launching a nuclear strike is via Metal Gear Rex. Rex is a giant mech that's got the ability to launch a nuclear strike from anywhere, and these strikes are also undetectable on any form of radar. So if they have a weapon that can do this, it'll essentially be the end of the world. Look, I get it. This is a lot to take in. I wrote this script out, and even I'm struggling to follow. and you've probably stopped paying attention by now. It's why I don't like going too far into the plot, and why I'm not a big fan of that in general in videos unless that's the specific point of them. But trust me, if you're actually playing the game, it's much more captivating. Now Snake's going in there alone. Everything is OSP, on-site procurement, but you do have radio support to help guide you. At the start of the game, this comes from Roy Campbell, who I mentioned before, Snake's former commanding officer. He supports Snake with information and tactics. He's your main contact, for all intents and purposes. Then you've got Dr. Naomi Hunter. She's a geneticist who provides medical advice for Snake. Then you got Nastasha Romanenko. She provides item and weapon tips. Now, unfortunately, she's one of the few characters who never reappears in the series, and I don't really know why. She doesn't die, spoilers. They make a point in the game of actually saying she's working from home in LA the whole time. She's quite nice to Snake too. She's one of the few people who, over the course of the game, aren't keeping anything from Snake. And for once, it's nice to have a friendly Russian in a video game. We don't only have to think of Russia as evil, we've got Russia to thank for Sharapova, Tattoo, Andrei Arshavin. Anyway, next we've got Mei Ling. She gives tech support for Snake. She invented the radar you're using, and she saves your progress too. I always thought this was a neat way to implement this into the game. It's not a simple pause and save or you walk into a glowing checkpoint. No, you actually have to dial Mei Ling's frequency on the codec and ask her to save the game for you. And then we've got Master Miller, Snake's former drill instructor and survival coach. He'll give you tips on the environment and the habitat around you. So that's your starting list, but then that grows to include Hal Emmerich, Otacon. He's a scientist who developed the Metal Gear Rex, who, upon learning of how the terrorists plan to use it, kinda feels bad about it, so he teams up with Snake to help prevent the launch. Then you've got Meryl, the Colonel's niece, and your kinda romantic interest. Meryl grew up idolising the Foxhound that Snake and Campbell were part of. At this point, she was with a military unit who'd been assigned to Shadow Moses, and this unit had mutinied alongside Foxhound. Meryl refused to join this mutiny, and she's now been taken prisoner. And then finally Deep Throat, another great name, just a code name. He's actually a cyborg ninja. But as I mentioned before, I'm not going to go into the plot scene by scene. If I tried doing that, we'd end up being in a right mess. So we'll come back to some plot stuff later, but for now, let's look at the gameplay. Even though this was Metal Gear's first 3D entry, it's actually played the same way you would play the previous 2D games, as you play the bulk of the game in a top-down perspective, with the camera switching to a more cinematic 3D angle from time to time, like when you lean against a wall for cover. Kojima stated he wanted to keep this top-down style because he wanted the gameplay to remain fast and responsive. See, at this time, it was only really Nintendo who'd figured out 3D controls with Mario 64, and Kojima didn't like the thought of having to point Snake in a direction and then have him run, like you'd see in Tomb Raider or Resident Evil or, most famously, Croc. Actually, a lot of people forget that the original GTA on the PS1, not only did that have tank controls, but I think you had to hold X to run. Like, if you just move the D-pad, you just wouldn't move. You just move the D-pad to turn. You actually had to hold X just to run in GTA 1. Strange game. So despite being mainly top-down, they did use a range of fixed camera angles for cinematic effect. In addition to that, you can also jump into the first-person perspective whenever you want to get a better idea of your surroundings. And although you can't move or shoot from this perspective, it's still useful. But that's actually not entirely true, because there's weapons like the PSG sniper rifle and the Stinger missiles that require a first person perspective to shoot them. And then you've got the Nikita missiles where you can optionally go into a first person perspective. So while it shares a lot of DNA with the old entries, it's still a pretty drastic leap if you're a series veteran at the time. As I mentioned before, you're aiming not to be seen by enemies rather than shoot everyone you see. And in fact, if you do fire off your gun or throw a grenade, even a stun grenade, and there are enemies about, this will trigger their alert phase. Your radar will jam, and all the enemies in that space will come and attack you if they know where you are. And if you kill all of them, there's a good chance more will come in, so unless you want to go through all your ammo and all your rations, try and kill the guy that spotted you, and then run and hide. Once you are hidden, this alert phase will quickly die down in about 10 or 15 seconds. It'd be much longer in future games, but it probably works for this one, since your options for evasion are a bit more limited. There's a couple things you can do to mess with the guards, like punching them or throwing them. I always find it quite funny with the throwing, like the way you can just throw guards in the game. They'll be alerted for a second, then they'll just go back to normal, like, must have been nothing. Like they weren't flat on their back like 2 seconds ago. Well, if you still want to take the guards out, but don't want to make a noise, and don't have a suppressor for your gun, which you can get early on, but it's very missable, what you're going to have to do is choke them out. But in my first criticism of the game, this is a bit finicky to do. You have to do this from behind, or they'll see you, and Snake doesn't have very good reach, so you have to get in really close, and there's a good chance you'll accidentally bump into them. Even when you don't bump into them and you're able to hold on, quite often it will still trigger that alert phase, so it can be pretty frustrating without a lot of practice. So all in all, you're probably better off just trying to stay hidden. You stay hidden by observing the guards' patterns and keeping an eye on your radar in the top right hand corner, even if it does get jammed easily. The radar's really generous and arguably works too well, to the point where you can just end up looking at that rather than the world itself, since as well as showing you the guards, it shows you their comically small field of vision. But it is a necessity due to the top down perspective. I think if the radar wasn't there, the game would feel quite cheap, because you can't see that far ahead of you. And now the AI of the guards is fairly simple, but it is solid, for want of a better word. As well as being able to see Snake, they'll notice his footprints in the snow like I mentioned before. Snake can even catch a code, and they'll hear him sneeze. As well as little touches like that, it all seems pretty fair. A lot of games even nowadays, you'll be playing a stealth section and you'll get spotted and you'll think, how'd that happen? But with MGS1, it's kinda all laid out there for you. As well as keeping an eye on the radar, Snake can hide behind walls, use chaff grenades to disrupt surveillance cameras, crawl under tight spaces, knock on walls. A lot of things that we can take for granted nowadays but felt really fresh back then. And of course, I've got to mention the cardboard boxes, which have become one of the series' most recognisable trademarks. It's unthinkable to have a Metal Gear Solid game without a cardboard box. Sometimes in later games, it can feel like a bit of a token gesture where you kinda just have to put a cardboard box in because it's Metal Gear Solid. I mean, by Metal Gear Solid 5, Snake could basically flick his wrist and he can have his own personal sniper, shoot the helmet off a guard, and while that poor guard's dealing with the shock of that, he can have a jeep dropped onto him from a hot air balloon above. What do you need a box for? But in this first game, you don't have as many gadgets or techniques to play with as you would in future entries, which means the box is genuinely useful. So you can hide yourself in a box, and as long as the enemy doesn't see you do it, or doesn't see you move in it, he'll treat it as just a box, and turn around, leaving you an opening. And even replaying the game now, after all this time, I go back to that trusty box, more so than I do in subsequent games. Of course, it's not all about hiding though. You quickly rack up a decent selection of weapons, from typical handguns, rifles and grenades, pineapples, to others like remote control missiles, C4, landmines. Controls are certainly interesting, and you could call them cumbersome by today's standards. Action-adventure games tend to all share a pretty similar control scheme nowadays, but back then, every game felt different, as making games in 3D was all still really new. Developers were figuring it out as they went. And for example, there's no button you hold to aim your weapon like you would with L2 today. The handgun, you hold down the square button to aim and release it to fire. Whereas with the assault rifle, you just hold down square and Snake will fire for as long as you've got it held down for. Then with weapons like the sniper rifle and the stinger, as soon as you select that weapon, you'll go into a first person perspective, and then you just press square when you want to fire. And also, instead of using the D-pad or a weapon wheel to select weapons like we would today, you use L2 to pull out your item selection and R2 to pull out your weapon selection. L1 and R1 are just used for quick selecting or equipping and unequipping, and that's all these 4 buttons are used for. If you play any modern game, you'll know these are usually your 4 main buttons for your weapons, sub-weapons, using your items, whatever, but with all 4 used just for selecting and equipping, you're suddenly a bit short on options. Back then, shoulder buttons, especially 4 of them, were still thought as a bit of a novelty and extra functionality rather than being the core of how we play like today. So I'm fine with it, but it's certainly a bit quirky. And that's the bread and butter really, Metal Gear Solid 1's gameplay, but it only makes up about half of it. In terms of square footage, it's actually a really small game, and I believe there are only around 23 normal patrolling guards that you have to sneak around the whole game. The other half is dedicated to bosses and set pieces. But before I talk about bosses, I need to talk about the codec. The codec is how you communicate with your team, and in call centre language these calls are both inbound and outbound. meaning they can call you and you can call them whenever you want. The codec is a pretty divisive subject with professional critics and fans of the series. The conversations you have on the codec can be quite long, which results in a lot of time spent listening to dialogue and watching a couple of GIFs talk back and forth. Personally, I love it, always have. It would be completely different if they only went one way. If your team kept calling you and you had no chance to ignore or skip them, aye, that would be annoying. But because it's a two-way street and it's so interactive and also makes sense in the game world, I love it. I mentioned before that Nastasha was a weapons expert. You can call her each time you equip a new weapon and she'll give you some specific info on that weapon over time. You can call Master Miller whenever you're in a ventilation duct or a snowy field and his dialogue will change accordingly too. But most importantly, you can choose not to call them and you won't get that additional info, it's just there if you want it. I think games today lack that kind of option or interactivity in reaction to what you're doing in the game world. A game today might have an NPC telling you all this stuff, but it'd probably be alongside you without giving you the option to engage. Or worse yet, Snake could have an inner monologue saying all this stuff to himself out loud.
In the Zenith base. Looks like they have a shield around the entire place. Of course, they'd make their base on their own private island. Hold on, Beta. We're coming for you soon. But back to the current problem. I've got to check out the areas that you mentioned. Near the big waterfall and south of that Horus on the ridge.
Metal Gear does tell you what to do, but it doesn't hold your hand quite so much. It doesn't even tell you how to crawl, how to push up against a wall, how to select, draw and fire your weapon. You read the game instructions and it tells you how to do all this. Imagine that, man. If you've forgotten where you're supposed to be going, you can call the Colonel and he'll tell you. For example, he might tell you to go to the armoury past that cargo door to the north. Whereas, if this was a modern game, if you're not going the exact right way for maybe 10 seconds, Snake could probably have an inner monologue saying, I should go to that armoury past that cargo door, and then the camera would probably pan to that door, and it'd also probably start flashing yellow. Some people, maybe even most people would prefer that, but I'm definitely with the former. One drawback I will give to the codec in MGS1 though, is that you do get some mandatory calls, and if you're replaying the game just for the gameplay and aren't interested in the story, shame on you, but you can only skip these conversations line by line, so you're furiously tapping X just to get back to the gameplay. They'd fix this in the next game where you could just hold down triangle and it'll fast forward the whole thing, but this is definitely my favourite looking codec of the whole series, so it regains points there I suppose. Another popular point of contention of the MGS series is the long cinematic cutscenes. MGS1 uses its own in-game graphics for cutscenes. At this time it was popular for games like Final Fantasy or Tekken to have short pre-rendered cutscenes that looked very different to the in-game graphics, but Kojima wanted to avoid this so there wasn't that jarring difference between what you just saw and then what you played. And I can only imagine, considering the length of these cutscenes, that having them at the standard of those ones that you see in the short Final Fantasy VII sequences would have added a few years and millions to the development and probably another disc or two onto the final game, because that's how much space it had taken up. Because you've got to understand, games had stories, cutscenes and voice acting in 1988, but nothing close to what Metal Gear Solid had. Those pre-rendered scenes that you'd get in Final Fantasy VII, that game took me about 35 hours to beat, and I reckon maybe about half an hour of that were those pre-rendered cutscenes. Most of it's just text boxes with no voice acting. And by the way, I'm not throwing any shade on Final Fantasy VII, I actually only played that game for the first time a few years ago, so I've got zero nostalgia for it, but I really enjoyed it. But it just is what it is. And then you had games like Tomb Raider and Resident Evil, which had voice acting, yeah, but...
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
And since I'd been an N64 kid, well, we've kinda gone over the voice acting that I was used to. But this was different. These characters were having proper conversations. Now, it's not up to the best standards we see in games today, in terms of how natural the conversations flow together, but it was light years ahead of what we had at the time, which I have to remind you is nearly 30 years ago at this point. But not everyone's a fan of this. Why wouldn't I just watch a film? Detractors might say it's more of a film than it is a game, and if you're looking strictly at playing time versus time either watching a cutscene or listening to a codec conversation, aye, it's a fair point. Well, for one thing, Metal Gear Solid 1 isn't actually so guilty of this. I can't remember too many times where it takes control away from you for more than 5 or 10 minutes, but they do get longer, especially in Metal Gear Solid 4. But I've always been of the belief that Metal Gear Solid never forgets it's a game first. When you're playing the game, it's not trying to wrestle control away from you or restrict you, telling you to play it their way. It's much more of a sandbox, even if this would progress greatly in the sequels. And as I've mentioned before on this channel, if you don't like cutscenes, they're skippable. If you're not interested, you don't have to watch them. You know what you do have to do? 20 minutes in fucking Coney Island in Spider-Man 2, going on rides, 20 minutes of picking fruit in God of War Ragnarok. I go on about today's single player games, I think I mention it in near enough every video I do. It annoys me when I have to walk slowly behind another character while they give me exposition, because when I do that, I zone out. I'm not listening to what they got to say anymore because I've gotten irritable and I'm annoyed at having to hold forward and maybe pan the camera around. But when I'm watching a cutscene or listening to a codec call in Metal Gear, it's got my attention because I'm not getting distracted by stupid stuff like not being able to move freely around the environment and not being able to interact with it except in the very specific way that the developers want me to. There's nothing for me to do except focus on the story, so I get more engrossed in it. I mean, that first section where I struggled so much with at first, it's perfect. You start at this dock, there's 2 enemy guards there, Snake has to either take them out silently or slip past them unnoticed. If you do get spotted, well, too bad, you either figure it out or die. He also has to stay hidden until this lift comes down, and when the lift arrives, another guard comes out and you need to slip past him too, get on the lift and into the heliport. Now, if this was released today, say you start off in the dock, Campbell would probably be with you in person for a start and not on the radio, and instead of a cutscene and codec call, you'd walk behind him slowly while he got you up to speed about the situation and the terrorist. He'd spot an enemy up ahead and ask you to take them out. You'd go up behind the guard, you'd maybe get a square prompt that'd flash behind the guard on the screen. The game would tell you to push square for a stealth kill. You'd tap square, of course it'd be impossible to fail, and there'd be an elaborate choking animation that would soon get tiresome. Campbell would then say something, doesn't matter what, but you know he'd say something. Campbell would then carry on, explaining the plot. You'd obviously squeeze through a few crevices, do the old Kratos shuffle. You then see someone guarding the lift. Campbell would then tell you you can knock up against a wall and lure him away. You'd do that, again it'd be impossible to fail because the game would kind of freeze until you hit that knock on the wall button, and then you finally get the lift up to the heliport. Alright, look, these are good games, when you're left to your own devices at least. Spider-Man 2 is a fun game, Horizon's a fun game, God of War is but they just get in their own way so much. Alright, rant over. One last point about cutscenes is that before you properly start the game, in the main menu, you can watch a mission briefing. These are some short videos of Campbell and Dr. Naomi giving Snake the lowdown on the mission. The game's intro gives a good abridged version of these, so they're not necessary to watch, but I always quite like watching them to soak up all the additional info, makes me feel like a real soldier. And they do actually include one of the most pivotal plot scenes in the whole series. It's quite mad how missable it is, even if it's brought up in codec conversations. See, in these briefing videos, Dr. Naomi is giving Snake an injection. She's telling him it's to regulate his temperature and vital signs or whatever, but what she's not telling him is that she's injecting him with a virus called Fox Dye, which I'll get to later. One odd thing you might notice in his briefings is that Snake has this long blonde hair for some reason. During the briefings, he's shown a picture of Liquid Snake, who looks just like him. And if you watch all of them, there's an extra one of him cutting his hair off, so he isn't mistaken for him. But why is he blonde? There's no real reason. It's either a mistake or they just couldn't make dark hair work in these briefing videos. Whole thing's a bit of a mystery really, but it's the last time we'll see blonde Snake. Hopefully by now I've described the flow of Metal Gear Solid. I mean, you basically sneak around, call your codec will call you, you'll have a cutscene that moves the story along, but I've not mentioned the bosses yet, which I probably should, because there's quite a few of them. The first boss you face is Revolver Ocelot. You chase him around a square room while one of the hostages is wired up with explosives right in the middle of it, so you can't walk through or fire in his direction. It's a kind of standard top-down gun battle, but you can actually accidentally shoot this hostage and Ocelot's bullets can ricochet around the room too, so there's a few things to think about. But once you defeated him, the hostage in question, Kenneth Baker, tells you to find Otacon, the scientist I'd mentioned before. On your way to go and see Otacon, you'll go through this snowy field which holds the second boss, Vulcan Raven. Now Raven's driving this tank that can fire machine gun rounds, and it also has a cannon which can really mess you up. The trick is to throw a chaff grenade to disable that cannon, and then when a soldier comes out to man the gun, chuck a normal grenade and then it goes down pretty quickly. But you're not really fighting Vulcan Raven here, it's more so the tank. This one's definitely tougher than Ocelot, and it makes you think a bit more. After destroying the tank, in a section where you have to guide a Nikita missile through an electrified corridor to destroy its generator, you meet Otacon, but he's been tormented by this cyborg ninja. He's gone and pissed himself as well. You need Otacon, so naturally you'll have to deal with this ninja. Now this boss is pretty poor by today's standards, to be honest. The hand-to-hand combat of MGS1 is very simplistic, and that's the only way to beat the ninja, is he'll deflect any bullets with his sword. It boils down to running away while he's trying to hit you, and then running back up to him to punch him a few times. He's dwindled his health down pretty slowly, so it's fairly tedious. Gets a bit more interesting when he starts going invisible using the stealth camouflage, which is when you pop on your thermal goggles so you can see him, and then he eventually goes down. Not my favourite boss, but I do like the destructible environment with the papers flying everywhere and the glass breaking. Snake will then meet up with Meryl on Otacon's advice, and they're headed to the underground base to shut down Metal Gear. Before they do that though, they have to get through the next boss, Psycho Mantis. Psycho Mantis has the ability to read minds and control people. During this fight, he's in control of Meryl, so as Snake, you not only have to beat Psycho Mantis, but you also have to stop Meryl from topping herself. Stopping Meryl is as easy as beating her up, or using stun grenades, just don't shoot her. As far as Mantis goes though, the physical fight itself is nothing special. I mean, just duck down when he's throwing furniture about and shoot him when you got a chance, but it's everything else that's so memorable about this one. I mentioned he's a mind reader, right? Before you fight him, he'll demonstrate this by commenting on how you've played up to this point, like if you've raised a lot of alarms or saved the game a lot, he'll slag you off, make you feel about this big. And also if you've played a couple of other games too, like Castlevania or Suikoden, and if you've got save files of those games on your memory card, he'll mention that too. It's a bit of a shame this didn't go even further back in the day, as I most likely would have had an ISS Pro Evolution save on the same memory card I used for MGS, and that's also a Konami game. So I'd have gotten a real kick out of Psycho Mantis saying something like, "Oh, so you go Parma in your Master League, do you? You sign Zinedine Zidane, but you bench him for Tijani Babangida because Babangida's faster. Where'd you get the nerve?" But wasn't to be. Doesn't stop there though. After this, he tells you to put your controller down and he'll move it for you. It's just a simple trick using the PlayStation's vibration in the controllers, but it's so effective. Then, when you do start fighting him, the game will go to an AV screen like you'd see on a telly at the time, like the Sony Trinitron. But instead of saying something like SCART 1, it will say Hideo 1. Hideo, Kojima's first name. And that would so easily have fooled you if you were playing on a TV like that. And even if you weren't, you might have just thought the game was bugging out, but it wasn't. It was Mantis's mind control. Finally, of course the best part. As you're fighting him, you'll notice he's dodging all your bullets and you'll wonder how do you beat him? Since he's a mind reader, he knows to avoid an attack after you've physically pressed the square button, but before the game has registered it. So how do you stop this? Well, he's only reading controller port 1. So the trick is to physically take your controller out of port 1 and plug it into port 2. And you can't imagine how mind-blowing that was back then. An amazing piece of fourth wall breaking, and why he's considered one of the most memorable villains in all of gaming. Now, hard act to follow, but the bosses are coming thick and fast now. After that is Sniper Wolf. First off, Sniper Wolf shoots and wounds Meryl. Since you don't have a sniper rifle at this point, you need to backtrack and go and get one. Now that you have a higher level of keycard to gain access to some previously inaccessible rooms in Shadow Moses. People complain about this backtracking part, but it's really not that bad. It takes 5 minutes, 10 tops. Sniper Wolf is a fun, tense sniper showdown. Snake's aim's pretty shaky, so he's advised to take some diazepam to steady his nerves. I always thought this was really cool back then as well. It's like, it seemed very adult, you know, like the guy's taking prescription drugs to steady his nerves. And it's a fun boss fight overall. Now, Snake beats Sniper Wolf, but he doesn't kill her. After this, Snake is captured and tortured. You can either resist or submit to the torture. If you submit, Meryl dies, but the game goes on. Once Otacon helps you escape, it's up the communications tower, and then you're met with Liquid piloting a Hind D helicopter. This is another one that's pretty tense the first time you play it. I don't find it as fun as a Sniper Wolf fight, as it tends to go on much longer. You basically have to fire homing missiles at his helicopter and avoid its gunfire. It gets tougher when the helicopter starts flying below eye level, so you only fire missiles in the small time window that the heli is above ground but not shooting at you. Not bad, but it's not one of my favourites to replay. After dealing with the Hind D, it's on to another snowfield and Sniper Wolf's back. You didn't kill her the first time around, like I said. It's another sniper fight, but this time it's made more difficult by there being less cover, making you more vulnerable. But a cheap tactic I like to exploit is using the remote control Nikita missiles to take her out. This time you do kill her. Now, before Snake had saved Otacon and he'd been held hostage by Foxhound, he'd had a bit of communication with Sniper Wolf and developed a bit of a crush on her. And he was convinced she wasn't really a bad person because she was good with animals. But her death is one of the more emotional parts of the game, particularly in the wolves mourning her. I like that they're in the distance and can sense her death though. If they'd all been gathered around her corpse howling, I think it would have been too in your face. I really like how they do it though. So, on his way to Metal Gear Rex's hangar, Snake is again confronted by Vulcan Raven. Didn't kill him the first time either. Definitely my favourite boss fight of this game in terms of gameplay, because there's a few ways you can take him out. You're in a large space with crates everywhere to hide behind. Raven's a big guy, you know what they say about big guys? Brilliant eyesight. Raven has a much larger field of vision than anyone else, so if he's facing in the direction that you're in, he'll be able to see you, unless you're hiding behind a crate. And he's got a minigun too, so taking him on head on is suicide. Some people like to run up behind him and shoot him with a pistol or rifle, but personally, I like to start planting mines all around for him to step in, and then hit him from behind with the Nikita. Tons of fun either way, and my favourite death scene in the game too. It's pretty brutal, like the Ravens just start feeding on him when he's still alive and giving his monologue. And I like that they don't explicitly show it either, and I like that Snake turns away in disgust too. And just like that, he's gone. But his minigun and the blood is still there when you need to track back, which I always quite like too. Now, there's 2 bosses to go, but as I talk about them, I'll try to catch up with the need to know stuff of the plot. At this point, Snake has a PAL key. He needs 3 of these in order to deactivate Metal Gear Rex. He didn't manage to save the 2 hostages he was ordered to save, because whenever he got close to them, they'd mysteriously die of heart attacks, which Snake reckons is a pretty big coincidence. Snake infiltrates the hangar in which Rex is being kept and overhears Liquid and Ocelot finalising the launch. Snake is then made aware that this one PAL key is actually all 3, as it changes its form depending on the temperature. See, there's 3 terminals with a PAL key slot in each one. You insert the first one at room temperature, remove it, take it somewhere cold, put it in the second terminal, remove that, take it somewhere hot, put it in the third terminal. This does involve a lot more backtracking. It is a bit annoying compared to what you had to do to get the sniper rifle. It's all quite linear, it's not that fun to traverse and it takes a while, but it does build tension, which is about to pay off. So once he's entered these 3 keys, to Snake's surprise, this is actually the last step in launching Metal Gear Rex, not shutting it down. It's really the exact opposite of what he wanted to happen. And that's when he gets a call from Master Miller, the guy you've been in contact with all this time, you could always rely on for advice in the field.
You found the key, and even activated the warhead for us too. I really must express my gratitude.
You mean you had this plan from the beginning, just to get me to input the detonation code?
Huh? You didn't think you made it this far by yourself, did you?
Who the hell are you?
In any case, the launch preparations are complete. Once the world glimpses the power of this weapon, the White House will have no choice but to surrender the Fox-Die vaccine to me. I'll tell you everything you want to know. If you come where I am, that is.
Where are you?
Very close by.
Snake, that's not Master Miller.
Campbell, you're too late.
Master Miller's body was just discovered at his home. He's been dead for at least 3 days. I didn't know because my codec link with Master was cut off. But Mei Ling said his transmission signal was coming from inside the base.
So who is it?
Snake, you've been talking to...
Me, dear brother.
Liquid, how the...
You've served your purpose. You may die now.
I love this twist, because it's one of the ones you don't see coming at all at the time. I mean, at least I didn't, but on subsequent playthroughs you start to see small hints of it. Whenever I do replay MGS1, I always talk to Miller as much as I can to see how convincing a job Liquid is doing in impersonating him. Now, believe it or not, I've skimmed over a lot of plot here, but now Metal Gear Rex is active and Snake has to stop it. This is probably the hardest boss fight in the game for me. It's got missiles, it's got a laser, it's got a Gatling gun, it can step on you as well. The best tactic is to stay close enough so it won't fire missiles, but keep enough distance to avoid the laser. Once Rex is down, all that's left is for a man-to-man scrap with Liquid. And while I love the setting of this fight, it's pretty simplistic and not all that much fun. Quite similar to the Cyborg Ninja fight, when you just run away from his attacks and get punches in while you can. Anyway, with Liquid down, all that's left for you to do is leave, made more difficult by the government deciding to bomb the place to destroy any evidence of this ever happening. So you and Meryl escape through a mounted gun tunnel sequence, fighting off Liquid again. In the end, you manage to escape. The bombing has been called off, but look who it is. I mean, this fucker, he's been blown up by a helicopter, blown up in a giant mech, kicked off the same giant mech into flaming rubble, shot several times while driving, and he's still wound up on top. But at that final moment, he dies. Another heart attack. Now, clearly these weren't heart attacks. Towards the end of the game, it's revealed to Snake the government's true reason for sending him. See, Snake is unknowingly carrying a weaponised fox-die virus. This is what Dr. Naomi injected him with in that briefing video. That causes cardiac arrest in Foxhound members on contact, and it lets the government retrieve the Rex undamaged. Dr. Naomi actually configured this virus to kill Snake too, at a random point in his future. Snake didn't know about any of this, of course. Campbell knew about Fox-die, but he didn't know it would target Snake too. Dr. Naomi knew about this, and she meant it, because she designed it, but she grew to regret it. There's loads that I can get into here with Dr. Naomi, Campbell, the Cyborg Ninja. The Cyborg Ninja is actually Dr. Naomi's adopted brother, but this video's long enough as it is. If you're at all intrigued, you're better off experiencing it for yourself, or at least watching a full playthrough. But you ride off into the sunset with either Meryl or Otacon, depending on whether you resisted or submitted during the torture. Otacon survives in both endings, so you don't need to worry about saving one or the other. But the canon ending is the one where Meryl survives, because she appears in future games. But now I'm done, all the necessary boxes are ticked. I want to cover my favourite aspect of Metal Gear Solid 1. I just want to talk about the atmosphere, the look, the feel, the sound of Metal Gear Solid, because that's what's always resonated the most with me with this first game, and still does today. I'll talk about audio first, and I may as well start with music. At the risk of spoiling any other future Metal Gear videos I might do, MGS1 has by far my favourite soundtrack of the series, and one of my favourite soundtracks of all time. It's not one of those soundtracks that's full of bangers like Street Fighter 2 or Streets of Rage, but it fits the tone and the atmosphere of the game so well. But it still gives you memorable melodies and hooks at the same time, because see, PS1 is kind of in that sweet spot where games were beginning to sound more cinematic and, much more so than 16-bit games, but they also hadn't completely abandoned melody and hooks that people love about older games. MGS1 has that cinematic sound, but as far as I know, it's all played on a rolling synthesizer. Synths, strings, choirs, drums, they're all there, but they retain a kind of industrial sound to them, which fits the sci-fi nature of this game. Then there's a couple of ballads, for want of a better word, which strike the emotional chord nicely as they're not overdone. Probably the most iconic song of this game and the whole series is the song that plays when you get spotted. That motif is also remixed when you die and during the boss music. Yep, it does shamelessly rip off the 1994 classic Speed, something I actually immediately noticed when I first played the game, all those years ago. It's funny actually because a few years later Konami get in trouble because the main Metal Gear Solid theme, which actually isn't in this game, it's in the trailer but it's not in the game itself, this theme was found to have plagiarised the work of this Russian composer back in the 70s, and they eventually had to stop using that theme in their games because it was like the big theme in Metal Gear Solid 2. I'll get to that in a later video, but I always actually thought that this Alert song versus the Speed song was a much more blatant theft than the big one, but I'm certainly glad it never got removed because I can't think of a piece of music that fits the tension of being spotted or fighting a boss as well as this one. But as well as that iconic theme, the rest of the kind of regular gameplay music just fits so well. Here's the cavern theme from the opening section of the game. Always sounds kind of ominous to me, as if I'm underground and I can hear large machinery being transported about. Then we go to much later in the game, into the blast furnace, and it's still really tense. The danger feels more immediate, less unknown, but you've grown in confidence at this point too or something. There's the kind of signature song of this game, The Best Is Yet To Come. Parts of this song play at the very beginning and throughout the game during the more emotional moments, but you only actually hear the full song at the end credits, which I think is a really nice touch. They use it a lot, but they don't blow their load. What I also like about this song is that it's in Gaelic. See, Kojima explained he wanted this song in a language that not many people would know, because when they heard it, he wanted to think they're not directly being told how to feel through the lyrics. They can hear the melody and kind of come up with their own feelings and conclusions. I've no idea why he stopped doing this, because some of the choices going forward left a bit to be desired. Star Sailor. But it's not just the music that makes it work, it's the whole soundscape, if that's a word. I'm going to play a short sequence that's full of iconic sounds. The sound when you pick up an item, select a weapon called the Codec, of course get spotted, are all iconic to me. And to this day I still see YouTubers use these sound effects in their videos. They might not even be gaming YouTubers, it's just how much these have managed to penetrate pop culture. Something exclusive to MGS1-2 is the reverb in all of the voice acting, except for those codec conversations. That's something people will pick up on. Even if they don't notice it immediately, they would notice if it was taken out. I think another reason it works is that because the graphics look a bit primitive nowadays, the reverb and the voices help the cutscenes age better. If you watch these cutscenes and the voices were like crystal clear, you'd definitely lose something, I think.
He couldn't read you? How'd you do it?
Surgical implants in my brain.
Surgical implants?
Kind of like a psychic insulation. Everyone who knows these top secret codes has it.
Even the DARPA chief?
Of course.
But the DARPA chief said Mantis got his code by reading his mind.
But even though the music's great, the game knows when to cut it out too. There's moments where all you'll hear is the cold air and your own footsteps. This can help build the tension too. I particularly like that some of the bosses are foreshadowed a bit with audio cues. Psycho Mantis is a bit different because the characters recognise the music that's playing. That's one of his forms of mind control. You can hear it in the background of a codec call you're having with Meryl because she's close to him physically.
The engineer's okay.
That's a relief.
I want you to look after him. Where are you now?
Very close.
There she is! Over there!
Oh no! Damn, they've spotted me!
Meryl, what happened? Something's wrong.
Did you hear something? Wasn't that some kind of music?
But besides that, there's moments where you hear wolves howling, letting you know you're close to Sniper Wolf. And then one of my favourite parts of the game. I remember my first time playing this. Thought I was just getting a lift down, getting a bit closer to Metal Gear. Then I start hearing those ravens, start seeing them, I immediately think, oh shit, I'm gonna have to deal with this guy again. Then of course I need to talk about the voice acting and the writing. David Hayter, the voice of Snake, described it very well when he said the writing's very Japanese. What he meant is that it's weird, there's elements of horror to it, it's maybe a bit pervy in parts too. After all, it is kind of like a western cross with a strong anime element, so how can it not be pervy? But it's also really detailed. I mean, what other game would go into this much detail about cardboard boxes or antidepressants? The game's overall message is one of anti-war, anti-nuke, and how we play with genetics and DNA and how they shape our lives. It's very political with a capital P. I'm not talking about pop culture politics we see in games today.
Ah, thanks! I need a new name for them!
Might also need to stop doing that problematic accent!
Yeah.
That distinct Eastern-Western style is always what's made the writing and Kojima himself so unique, because he's so clearly inspired and enamoured by Hollywood, but he grew up in Japan in the 60s and 70s, only 20 years removed from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which I'm sure influenced his upbringing somehow. As far as the voice acting goes, as I mentioned, it's not quite up to the par with the very best you'd see today, like Last of Us 2 or Red Dead 2, but 1999, it was miles ahead of the pack in terms of having believable back and forth conversations. For Snake, David Hayter would go on to voice Snake in many more games, but this was his first one and still my favourite.
I remember. First I'm strip searched by Dr. Naomi here, and then all my weapons are taken away. Imagine yourself put in that position.
Well, if you make it back in one piece, maybe I'll let you do a strip search on me.
I'll hold you to that, Doctor. By the way, sorry to disappoint you, but I did manage to smuggle out my smokes.
How did you do that?
In my stomach. Thanks to the shot you gave me that suppressed my stomach acids.
Cigarettes? How are those going to help you?
You never know.
It's the iconic Snake voice, but it's a bit more reserved. In later games, almost became like a caricature of Snake, a caricature of what it once was. I was surprised to learn too that this is one of David Hayter's favourite Snake performances too, and that he also felt that it had a bit too much of a singy-songy cadence going forward, which is funny because that's one of the things that annoys me about my voice when I watch one of my videos back. But he also does say that MGS4 is one of his favourite performances, which I don't agree with. The rest of the voice cast do a good job too. I think some of the villains sound a bit too over the top, but I'm particularly a fan of Dr. Naomi, played by Jennifer Hale. What's strange is that we don't see Dr. Naomi again until MGS4, when she's suddenly American, and for me, pretty bland. The English accent here is more clinical and gives her a bit of sophistication, not in a cheesy kind of James Bond way. If I get around to talking about Metal Gear Solid 3, we'll be talking about some cheesy James Bond stuff. And I can't really understand why they made this change. It's definitely not the voice actor's fault. She was apparently instructed to give Dr. Naomi an American accent in 4. Exact same thing happened with Mei Ling. She's got a kind of Chinese American accent in MGS1, and then just like Dr. Naomi, she's not seen again until MGS4, and she's just got this straight up American accent. I don't know if maybe these accents were deemed offensive, but I've never heard anyone say they prefer the accents in 4 than they do 1. And then in terms of visuals, I'm not really just talking about the game graphics here, I'm talking about the blend of like the cinematography, the look of the codec, the way it will throw in some real world footage that just gives this game such a unique look and feel. The environments do a really good job of making everything look very cold, whether it's the snow particles in the heliport, the footsteps, Snake's breath. Maybe I'm starting to repeat myself, but I've not mentioned the art design yet. One man who deserves nearly as much credit as Kojima is Yoji Shinkawa, the art director. He's the man responsible for the character and mech design. Shinkawa's got this really distinctive line drawing style that again I think is a blend of East and West, and also a kind of blend of realism and anime. I'm definitely no art expert, but I think these drawings really convey so much about the characters without needing to be hyper realistic. And I think you can probably do one of these drawings in about 10 minutes as well. When a character's mentioned in game, quite often their portrait will pop up, and that'll be one of Shinkawa's drawings. Most likely any official artwork you've ever seen for a Metal Gear Solid game will have been by him. And as an added bonus while I was researching this, I also found he's a Killswitch Engage fan, so now I love him even more. So I love the look and the mood of the game. On a technical level, it's definitely one of PlayStation's best looking games, but there are a few better looking ones out there. Tekken 3 for example has better character models and animation, Gran Turismo looks more realistic, Symphony of the Night is maybe aged the best, Actually, Tobal number 1 and 2 might have aged the best for me because there's no textures, so they just run really smoothly. Resident Evil 2 and Final Fantasy's environments obviously look better because they're 2D pre-rendered. MGS has that wobbly look that was so common in a lot of the PS1 games anyway. The characters can look a bit like puppets when they're moving about in the cutscenes, and save for a few pixels, there's barely any details in the faces. As a whole, it's generally considered that PS1, N64 and Saturn games have aged kinda poorly, more so than much older games like on the Mega Drive and SNES. I tend to agree, they are uglier to look at. But this is the very dawn of 3D games. Developers were pushing these systems to their absolute limits, and really you got to expect some growing pains. And having said all that, there's this whole revival now with low poly aesthetic, so maybe I'm wrong.
Basically, because these games were made with those limitations in mind, it added to the ambiguity, it added to the horror.
So those are my memories of MGS1. There's more to the game to give it more replay value as well. If you start a new game after saving Meryl, you get the bandana, which gives you infinite ammo. If you don't save Meryl, you get the stealth camo, which is basically an invisibility suit that lets you mess with the guards even more. There's different rankings you can get depending on how quickly or skillfully you played the game. There's also the VR missions if you want a strict, no story, pure gameplay session with more added replay as well. They'd later release a VR missions pack with another 300 of these.
Impressive, Snake.
Metal Gear Solid would go on to be considered one of PlayStation's best selling and most critically acclaimed games. The whole concept of stealth would go on to inspire the whole industry moving forward. So what's it like playing it again, today? Well, MGS1's actually one of my least played MGS games. I think this was maybe only my 4th time playing it the whole way through. I've played MGS 2 and 3 far more. I've only played through MGS 5 once, but that was like 150 hours to be fair. So when I come back to MGS 1, it's good to come away with something I didn't know before, like wolves pissing on you for example. It's obviously shown its age in some places. Even though it's snappier and better to control than most PS1 games, there's still some clunkiness to it. Some of the boss fights really aren't that great. The keycard system's frustrating too. You need to select your keycard every time you go through a locked door, so it's a bit annoying when you're using the gas mask, because there's a lot of unequipping and re-equipping. And if you remove bosses and backtracking, the game's incredibly short too, but that's not why I come back to MGS. I come back to MGS to remind me of that first playthrough, and nothing does that better than that intangible feel and mood that I've spent the last hour give or take trying to explain. I played this on the PS5 as part of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection. Now this collection got quite a lot of flack when it was released for being such a lazy cash grab, and I was like, yeah, and? Some people were expecting this to run at 60 frames per second and have modernised controls, but it was never marketed as a remaster. It was a collection, and that's what we've got. And I don't want a remaster. It's Konami, they'd probably messed it up. You've got the base game, VR missions, the Japanese only integral, the graphic novels. You get some bonus content too, like soundtrack, script, and there's this master book that gives you a bunch of Easter eggs of the game, history of the series, story overview, character bios. It's really no bad. Although there's a lot of text to it, and if you're sitting on your couch in your living room, you're going to have to pan and zoom across each page if you want to read it. I wish they'd gone the extra mile really and put this all in video form. I also wish it had included an art book solely dedicated to Shinkawa's work as well. My biggest issue with this collection, right, it includes MGS 1, 2 and 3, but these are 3 games treated as 3 separate games in your PlayStation home menu instead of all being under one roof, if you know what I mean. Even some of the bonus content is siphoned off into a separate game. That is annoying, but that's Konami for you. As a long time Pro Evo and Metal Gear fan, let's just say I'm used to it. Can't speak to the extra features in MGS 2 and 3 yet, but there's only one way to find out. That's right, my next video is going to be on Metal Gear Solid 2, and it's going to be sooner than you think for this channel anyway. I hope you've enjoyed this retrospective on MGS1, and I'll see you next time.